Greetings, fellow radiation weirdos. So I am here with a Plessy Controls PDRM82. Now, if you're looking for an overall review or overview of this device, especially something as technical as a teardown, I would recommend any of the other number of videos that have come up in your search on YouTube for this. This is more just me nerding out about how much I love this thing. There will be some information on it, but it'll be far from comprehensive, and unfortunately you certainly won't see a demo here just because of how high range this is. So, what is this? It is a Plessy Controls PDRM82 portable dose rate meter, and I believe 82 means that it came out in 1982, at least this version did. And this was the 1980s British government. They specifically contracted Plessy. This was their high-range radiation detector that there were additions that were given to the military with some different capabilities. These were also commercially sold, and also they were perhaps most famously used by the Royal Observer Corps, which is a citizen organization that did a lot of things, but in the 1980s, as a result of the ongoing Cold War and the potential for, nuclear catastrophe, they were outfitted with these and other meters with some added features in order to detect radiation in the event of a radiological emergency. Now, you can probably guess from my accent that I am American, and this is still relatively little known in the United States. Not completely obscure, but certainly not nearly as big as something like the CDV 700, of which I have one right here, or something like the CDV 715. So the 700, which I will make a video about, is an extremely low-range device. It is really only good for checking for contamination and also locating radioactive sources. Oh, I still have it on. I'm detecting some background, and I hope you enjoy the nice sounds of trains nearby my house. Gosh, where do I go from here? During the Cold War, the primary models that you will find that the United States made were the CDV 700, and the CDV 715. Now, as previously stated, the 700 is very low range, whereas the 715, which I do not have one, I may pick one up at some point in the future, is extremely high range, more oriented towards ground zero of a nuclear blast than it is anything else. To get a decent reading on a CDV 715, you would basically have to blast it with an X-ray machine or have a really hefty gamma source nearby. There's really no real way to test them for civilian hobbyists, so a lot of people joke that they're paperweights, but I digress. They are an important, wonderful piece of history. Now, PDRM82 is sort of the British answer, or not necessarily answer because it's completely unique, developed for their own needs. It's sort of the British equivalent and counterpart of the CDV 715. Now, this is absurdly high range. And when I say high range, I mean if you are seeing numbers on this thing, you already need to have gotten out yesterday. Whereas this thing can pick up something as simple as, uranium glazed Fiestaware or uranium glass at an antique store. This one, you pretty much have to have an unshielded X-ray tube absolutely plastering it with radiation in order to get a meaningful reading out of it. In its current state, it is really only useful as a display piece and a historical piece. Doesn't mean it's completely useless. There are folks who have modified these things. I've done a video in the past about where I suggest against that, just because so little is known about the internal check source, but we'll get to that in a bit. So, let's talk about how much I love this thing. So, let me open it up. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a rarity in the United States, because there really wasn't much of a reason for these to actually be sent overseas. The U.S. had more than their fair share of meters, mostly the CDV 715 and 717, if we're discussing high-range meters. And those were both ion chambers. And what is unusual about this one is this is an extremely high-range Geiger-Muller tube in here. Now, Geiger-Muller tubes like this one can easily get oversaturated, and there is something called the foldback effect. In addition to over-responding to beta radiation, that's a side thing. There's something called the foldback effect with most Geiger tubes, and that includes this, where if it is confronted with a radiation level that is too high for it, it will actually give false readings, and sometimes it will just go completely back to zero because it is physically not capable of getting readings that are that oversaturated. Whereas this, as a result of some very specialty technology, which you do not see in other Cold War Geiger tubes like the 700, this is a Geiger-Muller-based device, which is extremely high range. We're talking like ground zero after a nuclear weapon was just detonated, high range. And as a result, that comes with a double-edged sword of not being particularly useful to a hobbyist who is only going to be looking for uranium glass, radium dials, etc., but is extremely useful in the event of an actual emergency. Now, in its current state, I would not want to use this during an emergency because if the manufacture date of the early 80s is correct on this, I'll have to check the serial number. This is 4 decades old, at least. And there is a reason that gear is calibrated annually, if not more often, as a standard. It's because things can lose their calibration very quickly. It does not matter how good of storage you have it in. It does not matter what kind of technology it is. Things will lose calibration. Even the simplest things are prone to that. So at its current state, untested, it is best as a historical piece, and I love it as a historical piece. It is just so unique in every respect. I don't know. I don't want to say it's my favorite meter for not only the history, the design, the components, but it's certainly up there. And I love it for a variety of reasons. Now, I have not actually powered this up yet. Now, this is, I believe at the time, and I don't think still, but at the time, most flashlights, or torches, as they were known in Great Britain, and are known, were powered by C batteries. Now, C batteries are what this works off of, and I guess the idea was it would be powered by those because that would be most likely what people would have. Now, C batteries, I don't want to say they're uncommon in the United States, but I can never recall a household incident where I have had to use batteries, where I have had C's just lying around. It is almost entirely relegated to double A's, triple A's, and if you have a particularly large electronic, D. So I had to go out and specifically buy some C batteries, and as a result, I have not powered this item up whatsoever. Now, let's see. That's the on position. Give me a second here. I promise I'm an adult. I can get this open. This I might need to edit out. There we are. Now, fairly straightforward. I believe it fits 3. So, let me grab those. One, 2, and 3. And screw back on. You could probably skip ahead a little bit, just in case. There we are. All right. So, we are in the off position currently. Battery access, if you want, you could push it slightly back that way. And again, I have not turned this on yet, and there's actually a chance that it might not turn on. I don't know the history of this device. I don't know the situation with the calibration. I don't know where it was stored, but we'll see. Now, something that I was waiting until now to discuss is something I've released a video out on the past, is inside the electronics there is actually a internal check source that is part of the physical boot up process of the device. Now, most meters, and for those that don't know, a check source is a small source of radioactivity that allows you to check the functionality of your device, calibrate, etc. Now, something like this has a check source mounted to the side on this CDV700. It is a piece of depleted uranium, and what you would normally do on most devices is you would take your probe and you would wave it near this, and the clicking that would result would tell you that your device is in fact functioning. And this style of device with sort of this rectangular body and a detachable wired probe, sort of like what you would see on a Ludlam Model 3, which is a very common modern meter, most of those will have a check source mounted to the side. This has a check source mounted on the inside of it as a part of the physical boot up process, which means that there's no waving of a probe. It is actually checking it every time you turn it on to ensure that it is working, and if it is not working, if the check source is dislodged, has failed, or if there's an electronic problem, it will not boot up. But a moment of truth, we'll see if it works. All right, now it'll read fail if it does not come up. And there we are. 0.0, it is working. Now, unfortunately, I own absolutely nothing nearly radioactive enough to actually test this device out. Again, you would have to probably blast it with an X-ray tube in order for it to actually work, or to get a decent reading out. There was a gentleman, Weapons and Stuff 93, I can't recall his channel name, but he was able to get this to register 0.1 centigrade. And he did that by absolutely packing it to the gills in every single, with every single radium dial that he owned, which are some of the most radioactive antiques that you can readily find. Maybe outside of things like older check sources, smoke detectors, especially like radium or the Soviet plutonium ones. Radium dials are some of the heaviest gamma emitters that you can legally own, and this dude just packed as much as he could in there and barely got it to register something. So that'll give you an idea of just what a position you have to be in for this to actually function. I'm going to turn that off. Now, some little tidbits about this. Again, this isn't going to be a comprehensive review. This isn't going to be an overview. It certainly isn't going to be a teardown. You can watch my video specifically on the internal check source if you want my opinions on amateurs like me opening these things up. But I'm just going to go over a couple things with it. First off, this lovely box. Very little use, but that is what it came in. We have this. It is a shoulder strap. You can put it through some loops on the sides that allow you to carry it around. This is a lanyard, I believe, for wrapping it around your neck. And it also, oh, the lanyard's still in the original bag. That tape's probably from the manufacturer. That's pretty cool. And there are some brief instructions on the topic. Here you have some basics about what is what, where it is, how to use the unit, and also how to attach the straps. I may just read this out in full as a separate video, but if you want, you can pause right here and you can read the front. And you can also read the back. Just some additional tidbits about this meter that I can name offhand is It is apparently EMP proof, which is a wonderful feature to have. It was, after all, made for hypothetical nuclear Armageddon. Gosh, what else? It's a Geiger-Muller tube-based device, which is extremely unusual for a lot of high-range devices. Let's see. I have an edition of it somewhere, and maybe I'll read it, but this is probably most famous in the United States for being discussed in Nuclear War Survival Skills by Crescent Kearney, which was an official government document that was put out by, I think, the Department of Defense back in the 70s on basic survival skills that the average citizen would need in the event of a nuclear catastrophe. Now, Crescent Kearney, the author, he continued to update that book into his retirement, and in an edition that came out in the 80s, he talked about this specifically as one of his recommended meters for folks to pick up. He did say that a friend had a unit and tested it with I believe it was a high-energy gamma calibration source, and did find that there were some problems with it, and the meter was sent back to Plessey and replaced. So some of these units could very well be slightly off, but then again, given the 40 years in storage and no calibration, I wouldn't trust it now anyway in a nuclear disaster, but still just a little interesting piece of history. Otherwise, this is very fairly unknown in the United States. Again, it's mostly the CDV 700s and 715s that are discussed in the United States. And there wasn't, unless you specifically wanted one from Plessey, or if you ordered one since they were sold off as surplus, it's very unlikely for anybody in the United States or elsewhere to have a reason to own one of these. But that being said, there is something about them, which is that they are still relatively cheap, relatively reasonably priced for such a big piece of British Cold War history, and for something that was 400 pounds at the time that it was originally sold back in the early 80s. And for something that's so high range, it is remarkably low priced. And if you're watching this right now and it's still that way, I'd recommend picking up one before you can't anymore. I found this on eBay, but it's only a matter of time before people realize just what these things are, just what they're capable of, just their history, and the price starts to shoot up. We definitely saw that with, if you were a military surplus nerd, you knew about these things. If you were a physics nerd, you knew about these things. But otherwise, there wasn't really an explosion in Geiger counter ownership and radioactivity hobbyist hunting until the internet came around. And people started to realize that you could go to the local antique store and buy radium dials and Fiestaware and whatnot. And when that happened, prices definitely shot up, but moreover, demand definitely shot up. And there's plenty of these to go around, but take for example something like Chernobyl, the 2019 HBO adaptation. When that came out, the prices for dosimeters and dose rate meters that would have been used by the Soviets around the same time shot up in price exponentially. They turned overnight from a hobbyist niche product to something that would be used by military collectors and cosplayers and radiation nerds, and the prices went up quite a bit for those sort of things. And I'm not saying that there will be something similar with this, but let's say, like, hypothetically, they remake a movie like Threads, or if they do a spiritual successor, or if there's just some miniseries that happens to portray a hypothetical nuclear Armageddon from the 1980s in Great Britain, and on screen people are using these, the price could shoot up pretty well. Maybe not to an unobtainable degree, but there is a chance for, with cultural exposure in something like a Threads remake or sequel, if these are used, they might go up in price. And right now, they are very reasonably priced. I got this on eBay, I'm sure there's other auction sites where you could find them. But yeah, if you're watching this and if you're at all interested, I would recommend picking up one before you're not able to. And that's to say nothing of the other editions. There's one of these, I believe, nearly identical, except it has the ability to plug in an external probe that allows you to take outside readings from a bunker. There's a military one, which has a detachable Geiger-Muller probe like this. I can't recall if that one's high range at all, but it is low range enough to detect something similar. I can't recall if it has high range capabilities, I should say, but it is low range enough for to detect similar things to this, that is radioactive antiquities and whatnot. But yeah, it's a shame I can't really test it. Again, the only easily accessible way to do that as a citizen would be to hit it with an X-ray tube. But and I'll make a video on that in the future about my thoughts on that and how I, under no circumstances, recommend any amateur just dilly-dallying around with X-ray tubes. But I'll leave that for another time. However, until then, this is going to sit as perhaps my most beloved meter, just for its history, its design, its capabilities. I am unbelievably happy to have it. Yeah, if you are watching this and are at all interested, I would recommend purchasing one yourself. It's a beautiful piece of history, and it'll be a worthy addition to any collection. So, hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry it's not more comprehensive. I might just write a 3-hour video essay on this thing at some point. That's how strong my passion is for it. But for the meantime, this is more of just an overview, why I love it, and allowing me to nerd out about it. So, if you're one of the 3.5 people watching this video, 2 of which are bots, I hope you enjoyed it, and have a good day. Bye-bye.